In the Guangsa Castle, located on the Great Mountain of the 100,000, there is the Yang cult with its vicious demonic arts and mysterious demonic humans. Their total annihilation had been ordered by the rebel forces. However, in the heart of the Yang cult, there is a man who proclaims that he will execute them all. He recites the strongest art that reigns at the peak of all demons, the art of the celestial demon god. A great dark aura emerges from the boy's body, terrifying the rebel forces, who fall one by one at great speed at the hands of this martial artist, brutally killing. The place where this confrontation took place was the territory of the demonic cult. We transition to another scene of this same martial artist, named Jagak, the first son of the leader of the Muram Union. He was with several martial artists in a dojo, and they congratulated Yang for completing his isolation training. Yang was about to give a speech to motivate the group, but his spirit would leave his body, replaced by another person. They show and explain that Jagak mastered the 10 strike star movement. At the same time, he earned this title because he could find a way to counter any art within 10 exchanges of blows, and thus he boasted of his name as the most technical martial artist. And the politics of the Muram were like the calm before the storm. Internal conflicts and conspiracies continued to arise as a result of greed for the next leader's position. On the outside, unorthodox cults had begun to unify under the name of the Unorthodox Connection. Amid all this conflict, Yang would be dragged into political turmoil and poisoned to death before reaching the age of 30. We switch to a scene of Yang lying on the ground, abruptly waking up in complete fear. He got up, agitated, and touched his body, wondering if he had not died of poisoning. He thought it was all a dream, although he still felt sore. He was absolutely sure he had died, but apparently, he had been kidnapped, and he was relieved to know he was alive. Yang looked at an extensive and dark dilapidated hallway with luminescent orbs that provided a little light. He deduced that he must have been kidnapped by a fairly significant group. He wondered if it might have been the Eagle Clan, the HWA Mountain, or the Unorthodox Connection. The protagonist was aware that there were too many parties that would benefit from his death, so he had no way to narrow down the list of suspects. But he was not surprised that he had been poisoned amidst all the political chaos, simply because he was the first son of the Muram Union leader. Yang walked down the hallway to a blocked door, noticing a sack nearby, which he checked, finding several grains that would take years to consume. He could sense a lot of air flowing through the cracks in the door, so it was not a trap to kill him. He took this opportunity to regain his strength, assuming a meditative pose, proclaiming that all those who tried to kill him would regret leaving him alive. He tried to circulate his Kai but couldn't. He wondered if it was due to the poison and went in search of a water source. He looked at a fountain and approached to wash his face, looking at his reflection and becoming frightened as he didn't recognize himself. He was confused about his gender, so he checked his pants and was relieved to find that he was a man. He didn't know what was happening. He wasn't in his own body, and the energy within it was too impure. He tried to think of an answer but couldn't. He felt disappointed in himself, as despite being the best technical martial artist, he felt very lost in his situation. He resolved to try to control the impure energy and began to deduce that if he hadn't been kidnapped, his mind was probably extracted from the body of someone in isolation. He explored the place and found scribbles on the wall, which were made more than 100 years ago, but he could still identify them. He thought that these might be the martial arts that the owner of his body was trying to learn, although he was confused because they were very vicious and strange martial arts. He practiced the stances, trying to think of the author of the martial arts, but he couldn't come up with anyone because the martial arts were even too advanced for him. He noticed something written on the wall and read it. They were the last words of the previous owner of his body, who had died from a Kai overload, sending his energy to flow in the wrong currents. Although he also understood the meaning of his death since the drawings could only be interpreted by common sense for a normal person. However, Yang could notice that the martial arts written in the drawings were intended to destroy everything, so he proclaimed the art as the rebellion of heaven's movement. While meditating, he was able to make his energy flow throughout his body and release a great dark aura. Some time later, we see Yang eating the grains from the sack. He had lost track of time, and upon seeing that there were only a few grains left, he thought that several years had passed. However, during all this time, he was able to learn all the martial arts recorded in the drawings. Although he was sad that the drawings ended at the stage of the 10th star, so he couldn't fully master it. But still, he was content since everything he had learned from those martial arts surpassed the power of his previous life, and he was able to reach the stage of the evolutionary realm. He also gained 240 years of Kai, and he felt that being locked up was not so bad after all. Yang paid tribute and respect to the scribbles, making a vow not to deviate from the path of justice. He tells us that his father ruled the world of Miram, but he was sure that he could do even more. He could say the same about the arts of the elder monks, but those unidentifiable arts were something he could never surpass, even if he had trained much more in his previous life. He grabbed his robe to put it on and approached the door. He concentrated a large amount of Kai in his body and struck the door. With his current power, he wouldn't be easily defeated even if he faced the top 10 strongest Miram practitioners. The moment his hand touched the door, it cracked violently, and everything outside this mysterious cave would be sent flying. Yang shielded his eyes from the intense sunlight and stepped out, looking at a vast forest. He breathed in the fresh air and saw a man sleeping. He approached him to ask something and woke him up. The man, upon seeing him, was terrified and crawled on the ground, unable to speak. Yang was a bit disappointed that the first person he met after a long time was a me. He asked if the man was unable to speak, and the man cried in terror, kneeling in front of the protagonist, begging for forgiveness for his life and sins. Yang asked him to calm down. However, the man asked if he was planning to put him in the gallery of 10,000 demons. Yang saw that he started hitting his head against the ground to kill himself and grabbed him by the shoulders to stop him. However, the man lost consciousness. The protagonist laid him against a tree and went into the forest. As he traveled, he would come across a village, descended the stairs, and one of the guards in the place noticed Yang. They looked at him coldly, and Yang tensed up as the guards emitted a great deal of energy. He wondered what kind of place they were guarding for someone like. The guards approached slowly, and Yang wondered if he should fight, but he was surprised to see them kneel before him, congratulating him for completing his isolation training. Yang was confused because they called him the little leader and looked at the entrance to the village, which was Guangming. Upon reading this name, Yang became frightened. That place was known to be hidden in the vast 100,000 great mountains, a place from which no one can escape once they enter. Guangming was popularly known outside as the cult of the demon. He thought about the guards showing him respect by calling him the leader and wondered how he could end up in such a situation when he was the son of the Miram Union leader, someone who always had to fight for justice, yet ended up as the leader of a demonic cult. Yang remained trembling. The martial arts he had learned were from the demon cult. One of the guards commented that if he had completed his training, it meant he had mastered the arts of the celestial demon god. Yang turned to look at the guards, and those words sent a chill down his spine because he had made a pledge without knowing it to the celestial demon god. The protagonist grabbed one of the guards by the shirt and started crying and shouting in front of everyone. The guards asked him to calm down. Yang would lose consciousness. He couldn't believe that he had learned demonic martial arts after being reincarnated. Then we see Yang waking up suddenly in his bedroom. He wondered if it was all a dream, looked at a plate, and washed his face. He looked at his reflection and started crying when he realized it wasn't a dream. He wondered what he had done in his life to deserve such punishment. In the Mayan cult, 7 Palaces of the Black Floor, a woman asked a girl to straighten her head and not crease her forehead. The girl's name was Danyewa, the second daughter of Dan Yunghak. She yelled at the woman, saying she shouldn't be smiling vacantly when Yang has just returned. Yewa commented that 3 years had passed, and she didn't want the protagonist to return suddenly in such a short time since she had always wished he had died while trying to practice martial arts. The woman warned Yewa that she shouldn't say such things because someone might overhear her. Yewa exclaimed that she didn't care if someone overheard, as everyone knew that she had always wished for Yang's death. The woman reminded Yewa that she was designated to marry the protagonist and shouldn't say such things. Yewa mentioned that the martial arts of the celestial demon god were about a fighting style that not even the sect leader could learn, so she didn't expect anything from it. She had also heard that the protagonist had cried and fainted. The woman told her that the protagonist was probably very sad because things didn't go as he wanted, even if others didn't know it. Yewa shouted at the woman, saying that it didn't matter, as Yang wasn't outstanding in anything and only used his power as a leader to desire other women. She sighed, and they revealed that she was also very attracted to Yang, but her fantasy was shattered after the first encounter. They show that in the past, she had met the previous owner of the protagonist's body, and he had asked Yewa to massage his feet, and in return, he would give her that massage, suggesting they mix their bodies together. All this happened when Yewa was 15 years old. She also told the woman that the boy knew nothing about the martial arts of the celestial demon god, thinking it was just a legend, even though many of his ancestors had died trying to learn it. He had locked himself in the gallery of the celestial demon god, and everyone had applauded him for it, but because he was so so hated. No one had stopped him, even though it was very likely that he would die. Yewa began to cry because she was considered the ice flower and didn't want to marry someone as useless as him, especially after learning that he had returned from isolation crying. The lady suggested to her that she should go to the Myung Palace, arguing that Yang might have changed after 3 years. In the small Myung castle, we see the protagonist reflecting on his situation. It has been 4 days since he regained his consciousness, and few people visited him, despite being the future leader of the sect. However, he had managed to find out some things, such as the fact that the owner of his body was the Myung leader Ma Cheonso. His attitude was unacceptable by his standards, and he was known as the lust ghost. Ma Cheonso desired women greatly and used his status to do things worse than an evil spirit if things didn't go his way. Yang didn't expect much since he had been reincarnated into the body of someone from the demon cult, but he didn't expect that it would be the worst person possible. The second thing he discovered was the reason Ma Cheonso had managed to remain intact after doing such things. His father was the current leader of the cult and was one of the 3 supreme beings who even surpassed the 10 masters of the lands. His name was Ma Tipia, and Yang wondered if he should be happy to call one of the strongest people in the world his father. The third thing he learned was that he was the leader's only son and had that status. He didn't know if Ma Cheonso was disinterested or stupid, but he had lived his whole life without making an effort. Although he had learned the arts of elevation, he wasn't good at it, and his social skills were a disaster. The only thing he had was the small Myung castle. When he heard the servants' conversation passing by, he learned that Ma Cheonso couldn't learn martial arts, and his father wouldn't leave him alone, so it was very likely that the next leader would be a Yul Jin. However, he couldn't blame them, as those were words he should be used to hearing about Ma Cheonso. Yang thought about the possibility that Ma Cheonso didn't have much time to live and might have died even before experiencing a Kai overload. But amid all that, he was calm because he also discovered that his body was 19 years old, and only 3 years had passed since the day he died. Yang washed his face, and even though he didn't want to, he couldn't do anything about a path that had already been set, and he could only accept his new life. He didn't care about everything that Ma Cheonso had done. He was willing to change it and live his own life as young Jagak. As he looked at his reflection, it spoke. It was Ma Cheonso who challenged the protagonist, asking him to do his best. Ma Cheonso commented that even if he tried his best, this was the demon cult, and even if he tried, he wouldn't be able to remain as young Jagak for long. The spirit left the mirror and threatened the protagonist that he would watch him. Soon, someone opened the door, and Yang turned around, alarmed, seeing Yewa, and asked her who she was. At that moment, Yang realized that he shouldn't speak with so much politeness in his current body. Yewa, annoyed, asked him if he had forgotten her. Yang got nervous, as it might not be the first time Ma Cheonso and Yewa had met. Seeing her attire, he thought she was a servant and asked her to go clean and not bother him. Deep down, Yang was bothered by treating people this way, but it was the demon cult, and he was being observed by Ma Cheonso's spirit through the mirror. Yang realized that Yewa started crying and slammed the door forcefully to leave. The protagonist took the opportunity to explore the place and would encounter the palace bodyguard, Ye Yultak. He was Ma Cheonso's friend and the only person who had visited him in the last 4 days, even though only they currently lived in the palace. Ye Yultak commented that the protagonist probably lacked negative energy, referring to having sexual relations with women. He approached the protagonist and asked if he should make a reservation at a brothel. Yang restrained himself, as he was being too obscene for his taste. The protagonist told him that he would ask several questions since he hadn't fully recovered his memory. Yultak touched the protagonist's forehead and looked at him coldly, saying that he was speaking like people from the Orthodox sect. Yang, upon hearing this, tensed up and got nervous, asking him to stop rambling and fell silent, wondering if he had noticed. He tried to think of a solution and believed he should kill him and leave. Yultak started laughing, mocking Yang and saying that he now liked to act like a good guy. Yultak asked him what he wanted to know, and Yang realized that his bodyguard cultivated plants and tried to touch them. Yultak tried to stop him, but the protagonist praised him because the leaves smelled very good. Yultak asked if he was the real Ma Cheonso or if he had overloaded his upper core. Yang asked him how he should act, and Yultak gave an interpretation of Ma Cheonso, complete with insults. Yang looked at him disappointed, but Yultak told him that it was normal because he was the worst in the cult, and it was normal for people within the sect to use foul language. Yang asked how the cult was structured, but he was interrupted by the sound of his stomach. Yultak mocked him and proposed to go to a restaurant, mentioning several dishes. The hungry protagonist pushed him to go right away. Yultak remembered something and told the protagonist that they wouldn't be able to go to that restaurant because there was a meeting of the Myung cult. Yang asked what that was, and Yultak revealed that it was a meeting where all the sons and daughters of important families in the cult gathered. He advised him not to go, and the protagonist left with Yultak. Our protagonist enjoyed the fresh air of the sect. Yultak asked him if he really wanted to go to that meeting, and Yang affirmed it. Yultak mentioned that he remembered the reasons why he shouldn't go. Yang ignored him and asked about the cult structure. Yultak explained that the cult consisted of 9 palaces divided into the 2 Mayang and the 7 side palaces. The 2 Mayang palaces referred to the Gwangyang Palace where the leader resided and the small Mayang Palace where they currently resided. However, he clarified that the rest of the palaces were a threat to Gwangyang. Yang asked why, and Yultak revealed that the leader was missing and no one knew his whereabouts. For that reason, they were considering selecting a new leader. The only thing known about Ma Tiepyeong was that he had disappeared overnight, leaving only a note asking not to look for him. The protagonist reassured Yultak, saying that he was now present. But Yultak began to mock him, saying that he was extremely weak, not very smart, and his actions were embarrassing. However, he mentioned that he had returned after learning the art of the celestial demon god, which caused those who attempted to practice it to lose everything, and he appeared to be healthy. Yang asked how many people were part of the cult, and Yultak said there were 100 people. The protagonist couldn't believe it, and Yultak explained that despite everything, they were regarded as enemies of the country. Yang asked if the 7 side palaces assumed governmental functions, like the 3 departments and the 6 ministries. Yultak didn't know how to respond, and the protagonist explained that if that were the case, there must have been a rebellion since Tiepyeong had been absent for over 2 years. Yultak replied that there was indeed a rebellion, but not all the palaces were on the same side because there were unaffiliated palaces that couldn't ignore the Council of Elders. He also revealed that all the palaces were waiting for the Mayang cult's Heaven Festival, which occurred every 2 years. Still, now that he had returned from isolation, he could change things. Yang thought about the structure and the possibilities of the rebellion, which, if it were to happen, could be a total war that would destroy everything. He thought about changing things, even if he had to use destruction to do it, not as a member of the cult but as someone who followed the path of justice. At the Mayang restaurant, we see 2 civilians trying to enter the restaurant, but a guard didn't let them in and called the second son of the leader of the poison squad from the Palace of Steel. Yewa, known as the second daughter of the Sword Palace, also arrived. The civilians began to murmur since she didn't usually participate in social events. However, we see that Yewa's reason for attending the meeting is to offer herself to another man and break her marriage with Ma Cheonso. One of them praised Yewa and mentioned that today could be his lucky day. This man was Chun Amu, the second son of the king of the Merchant Palace. Yewa ignored him, but Amu continued praising her to get her attention and approached her with a smile. Uncomfortable, Yewa heard that one of the heirs announced that Ma Cheonso was making his entrance. Yultak glanced at the protagonist and asked him to return, as he believed they were in the wrong place. Yang pushed him to approach the guard, who was surprised to see both of them. Quickly, the frightened heirs tried to leave the restaurant. However, the guard proclaimed that they should stay and politely receive the protagonist. Yang realized that Yewa was leaving and followed her, appearing behind her. Yewa noticed and got scared. She tried to slap him, but the protagonist dodged the slap and caught her before she hurt herself. Yewa asked him to let her go, and he did, mentioning that he didn't want her to get hurt. Yewa continued her tantrums, so Yang warned her to contain her personality. He explained that in any other place other than her palace, she could be punished with something serious. Yewa warned him that he should leave, as he could get into trouble being at the meeting. The protagonist asked her not to worry, and Yewa left, wondering why Yang suddenly attended the meeting without fear. Yang entered, and Yultak asked him where he had been. The protagonist answered that he had been in the latrine, and both went upstairs. Amu asked the protagonist if he had made any progress in martial arts, as it was news that he had come out of the gallery of celestial demons. He commented that he should have gone to a market if he wanted to have fun with a woman since he had entered the wrong place. Amu noticed Yultak and said that his family had abandoned him for trusting a rotten lifeline, and he should be ashamed of humiliating his family. Yultak was about to do something, but Yang stopped him and he sat down. Confused, Yultak looked at the protagonist, but he apologized and asked him to continue with their discussion. He started eating. Amu verbally humiliated the protagonist and asked if he was in a bad mood, but Yang was afraid that Amu looked like a toad. Yang asked Yultak who Amu was, and he told him that he was the worst of the worst from the Merchant Palace. Yang looked at Amu and insulted him as well. Annoyed, Amu asked if he had no common sense, throwing a chair. He threatened, saying that Tiepyeong wasn't on his side, so he couldn't handle a situation by himself. The protagonist asked Yultak about Amu's privileges, and he commented that he could punish him or have a military force within his own palace. With that, the protagonist realized that he had the power of a judge and an emperor. Yultak took the opportunity to insult Amu, provoking him. Yang saw that Amu grabbed a the cup, analyzed his movements, and could predict that he would only scare him. However, Yultak stood in the middle, protecting the protagonist and crying in pain. Yang took the opportunity to threaten them all, saying that he could report what happened to the elders or speak to the king of the merchant palace. He then asked if they were thinking of rebelling with Amu at the meeting, which they instantly denied. The other heirs asked the protagonist for permission to leave, and he granted it. Yang provoked Amu, saying that if he really wanted to kill him, it was the perfect opportunity, wishing the merchant palace luck in their rebellion. Irritated, Amu put his hand on his sword, but Yang looked at him coldly, and Amu felt intimidated and apologized. Yang scolded him, saying that a scolding was not enough after seriously harming someone. Amu told him it was because he used Yultak as a shield, and Yang coldly asked him if he thought his father's name would be enough to excuse him from all his sins. He clarified that although there were people who would bow to him, his blood and tears could become daggers directed at his heart when the time came, and when that happens, he will punish him. After these words, Amu knelt before the protagonist, asking him to spare his father, as he was aware that he had committed a crime worthy of death. Yang scolded him for speaking too much and asked him to inform Princess Sang-yi that he would visit her soon. The civilians began to murmur in astonishment, unable to believe that Yang had declared war on the merchant palace. In the merchant's palace, the news would reach King Sang-yi. Chun Sae-min. Amu tried to explain the situation to Chun, arguing that he was only trying to give Yang a little scare. However, the king scolded him for what he had just done. Amu tried to explain to his father that Yang was the most useless leader of all, so he shouldn't be so angry. Chun replied that even if he was useless, he was still the future leader of the sect. Amu revealed to the king that he thought Yang's martial power had overloaded, but upon meeting him, he felt he was in front of a fierce tiger. Chun ordered Amu to lock himself in the Golden Sky Gallery. He said it was too harsh of a punishment, as he didn't want to go through isolation training. Chun asked him to be quiet and ordered him to leave, then asked Chen Bai-rang to enter. Since Taepyeong left the cult 2 years ago, the opinion of the Council of Elders and the Seven-Side Palaces changed to choose a new leader. A new leader was designated to emerge during the Myeong Cult Sky Festival. However, Ma Chunso returned from his isolation training. If the king were removed due to his absence, only the protagonist remained as the person with the highest hierarchical power. Due to the situation with Amu, everything became a powder keg ready to explode. He needed more time to decide, observe, and think, but Amu accelerated things too soon. Chen Bai-rang presented himself to Chun. He was the leader of the Golden Sky Cavalry Squad. Chun asked if Yang was aware of the situation, and Bai-rang commented that he was known to be a peculiar man, so it was difficult to know if he had ulterior motives. Chun was somewhat relieved but wondered how the protagonist was able to handle Amu so easily, considering Amu had called him a tiger. Bai-rang reminded the king that Amu was known to be shy, while Yang was a top-class martial artist in his prime. Even though his Kai had disappeared, he wasn't someone to be concerned about. Bai-rang revealed that the current situation could be a great opportunity. Chun looked at him with astonishment and asked why he believed that. Bai-rang explained that the entire sect was in balance, and Yang was the key. If they managed to get him on their side or kill him, the situation would change drastically. Chun said that was his concern. With an accusation of rebellion, it could be the end for the palace, as someone else might try to assassinate Yang and blame them. Bai-rang explained that this was the opportunity, clarifying that Yang was known for being reckless and impulsive. If they greeted him well and gave him gifts, they could gain his trust. Chun asked if he intended to protect and gain the approval of Yang. Bai-rang admitted that the merchant cult should be able to control the Myeong cult. Chun added if he meant they should become the regents of the Myeong cult, which Bai-rang confirmed. So the king asked him to fetch the sword of the sacred flame demon. Bai-rang told him it was a divine treasure of the Myeong cult, but the king said they had no use for it. But after thinking things over, he stood up, willing to present himself in person at the Myeong palace. Yang was meditating and thinking about the possibility of rebellion. If he was to live as the future leader of the sect, the most intelligent thing to do would be to rule the cult by himself and bring peace to the Central Plains. In this regard, the merchant's palace was the first target because he would need a solid economic base. The problem was that he lacked his own forces, as he wouldn't be able to defeat them alone. He needed to find people who weren't associated with other forces. The only warrior under the name of the Myeong Palace was Yultak. The latter scolded him for causing a mess in the restaurant. He desperately asked him to go to the merchant palace to apologize and clarify that it was all a joke, or else everything could turn out very badly. Yang commented that he made sure to be very serious and asked if what he did looked like a joke. Yultek asked if he wanted the list of names according to the Mayang cult hierarchy immediately, which the protagonist confirmed. Yultek asked what he planned, and Yang explained that he wanted to fill all the vacant houses in the palace. This surprised Yultek, who commented that the situation he had caused wasn't something to be taken lightly. They could destroy Amu, but if Yang brought people to the Mayang palace, the 7 side palaces, and the council of elders wouldn't leave him alone. Yang asked who he was, and Yultek replied that he was the little leader. The protagonist asked if he needed anything else, which Yultek denied. Yang put on black clothes and a hat. They both roamed the village, where Yultek explained the distributed structure that spanned a vast mountain. He revealed that they had issues with trade and supplies. Yang proposed that everyone come down from the mountain to negotiate, but Yultek explained that if they did, they would be attacked by the Orthodox in the country. Yang commented that this was because they had done a lot of harm, and the solution was to stop doing it. Both continued climbing the stairs. While this happened, someone in the darkness of their room was writing a letter. Back with the protagonist, he arrived at the Gwanmyeon library. The librarian glanced at the protagonist. Yultek tried to keep a low profile to avoid being discovered. Yang overheard their conversation and noticed that the topic they were discussing made no sense, so he deduced it was a code. However, the librarian kicked the protagonist and Yultek out of the library and opened a secret tunnel to approach a door. He mentioned that people from the Mayang palace, including Yang, were present. The elder behind the door asked what had happened in the gallery of the heavenly demons, since it was too strange for Yang to have caused the restaurant incident and now visit the library. He asked what the protagonist wanted. The librarian replied that he wanted the list of hierarchical names of the Mayang cult. The elder said it was difficult to predict what the protagonist would do, so he decided to present himself in person. The librarian came out and guided the protagonist and Yultek to the underground. They entered the elder's room, which was filled with drawings and information about every person in the world. Yultek was astonished. The elder greeted the protagonist and recognized him as Ma Cheonso. Yang noticed that the elder was in a wheelchair, and he explained that he had made it himself. The protagonist looked at the sheets and was frightened to see that it was a list of all martial artists in the Murim from every faction. Yang wondered who the elder was since he was too surprised by the amount of information. However, he got scared when he saw information about his father from his previous life. The elder mentioned that he had just recognized someone from the Murim Union. Yang's attitude changed completely, and he asked the elder about his identity, as all the information was too heavy and secretive for a simple library. The elder said he was just an old man in a wheelchair. However, the protagonist clarified that with so much information, he could start a bloodbath. The old man responded that's why he was hiding in the underground. Then he threatened both of them that if he died, no one would be able to leave alive. Soon, the door to the room would close. Yang told him that sounded like something someone willing to start a rebellion would say. The old man mentioned that he wouldn't be capable of doing that. However, Yang said he could return with martial artists, and the old man clarified that if that happened, he would already have disappeared. Yang asked about his intentions, as he should deliver the list above, but the elder asked him why he was looking for the Mayang cult's list. This made the protagonist nervous because the elder was an expert in reading people, so he revealed to the old man that he only wanted to recruit martial artists who lived in his castle. The old man commented that he couldn't find the talent he needed. Yang clarified that he only wanted forces for his house, specifically those without an affiliation. The old man fell silent and asked if he wanted to enhance his influence. Yang replied that he just wanted to fill empty spaces. There, he warned the protagonist that he should be aware of the current dangers. But Yang said he didn't intend to remain passive. They looked at each other and Yang asked for his name. The old man introduced himself as Eagle, with Tong being his given name. This left Yang stunned. Then we see a flashback between the protagonist and Eagle, who had met in their previous lives. Eagle was known for being the best brain in the Central Plains and the senior who had been kind to the protagonist when he first joined the Dragon Squad. Yang was sad and looked at Eagle, wondering how he had ended up like this. The protagonist commented that it was impossible since Tong should only be 40 years old. This surprised Eagle, starting to suspect Yang, as no one was able to recognize his identity so easily. Yang took the opportunity to tell him that curiosity killed the cat, a phrase he used a lot in his previous life. Eagle fell silent and apologized. Yang asked how he ended up like this, and Eagle replied that he simply ended up like that on one of his many journeys. Yultek mentioned that the surname Eagle comes from the Orthodox sect, and Yang quickly grasped the whole situation, explaining that many people use that surname. Eagle asked him what he planned to do because his actions had started to attract a lot of attention from the Council of Elders, the minor palaces, and the Mayang Palace. Yang smiled because Eagle had completely understood his intentions. demons. The old man didn't say anything and showed the list of the heirs of the demon cult. Eagle commented that he had only written 2 words for the protagonist and asked if he could guess. Yang replied that he was a madman. Yultak felt offended and threatened Eagle, but the protagonist quickly asked him to leave to bring tons of water. Now that they were alone, Eagle said he thought he knew everything, but now he had to move. Yang asked why, and Eagle explained that he had changed completely and now only saw a wise and brilliant man. Eagle explained in great detail to the protagonist all his movements and what he planned to do, mentioning that his goal was to become the leader of the cult. To achieve this, he would need help from the Council of Elders, the minor palaces, or him. Both smiled, and Yang asked if he could reach the top with his help. Eagle asked for 50% in return. Yang sighed and said he didn't plan to become a leader. He explained that if he did, he wouldn't have enough power to do it. To achieve that, it was best to change the sect completely from within. Eagle said he was weak in martial arts and Yang, and he asked that they join forces. Yang fell silent, now looking at Eagle with contempt, wondering how he had fallen so low. Annoyed, he released his aura, mentioning that he would change the cult with his own power. Yang assumed a stance, and Eagle was scared when he saw the celestial demon god in his eyes. Eagle commented that if he had the power to change it, why did he want to choose another path? Yang said he wanted to eliminate evil and would do it because he was the young king of the cult. Eagle started laughing, completely crazy, and begged for his life, clarifying that he could guide him on the path he wanted to take. He asked if he knew the underground gate, and Yang began to doubt what he was referring to and noticed that Eagle's expression had changed. The latter revealed that he was the 19th chief of the underground gate. Yang commented that he couldn't trust him now that they had revealed their cards, so he asked what he wanted. Eagle replied that he only wanted him to deliver the military advisor of the Muram Union, Eagle Mundi. Yang turned around and asked if he was the only person he wanted, and Eagle commented that he'd prefer it if he brought him back crippled. Eagle took the opportunity to tell the protagonist the whole situation in detail about the demon cult. Then he handed him a mask and the list. The mask was one used by a hero in the legends of the Mayan cult. Eagle advised the protagonist to convince the elders and palace kings to join his side before the festival of the sky occurs, revealing that he had only 4 months to achieve it. He showed the protagonist a man named Ultisik, mentioning that he should start with him. He explained that Ultisik was a general who used to command the troops of the heavenly demons in the cult. However, since his wife's death, he retired and now lives in the lower districts. At the peak of water, on the outskirts of the market, we see a group of civilians waiting in the scorching sun, thirsty and hungry for Yang's arrival. The latter arrived by boat at the peak of water and noticed that the civilians were dying of hunger and thirst, but he did nothing to keep a low profile. Yultak had lunch with the protagonist and mentioned that in such a small village, they should be able to find Tisik. Yang commented that it was strange that the peak of water was so rich for agriculture, but still so poor. Yultak explained that it was because no one in the village wanted to work. Then we see one of the villagers informing a hooded figure about the arrival of the protagonist. This hooded figure was surprised and asked if something had happened to Tisik. He asked to send Tisik's daughter to the protagonist's dormitory. Back with the protagonist, we see him walking through the village. Yang asked Yultak if he sensed anything strange, which he denied. Yang approached a villager, knelt before her, touched her face, and made her lie down. We then switched to a scene of a villager swimming in the depths of the sea until he reached a cave. Upon resurfacing, he encountered another individual. The latter entered the place and found several men playing various gambling games. Some of them argued. The villager took out a knife and injured 2 of the men to order all of them to return to work by the boss's orders. He asked for Tisik's location, and one replied that he was probably with his daughter, clarifying that he was only with her when he wasn't working. The villager asked them to bring both of them, explaining that they needed to send the daughter to Yang's room. We switched to a scene of Tisik with his daughter, who was feeding him. Her name was Haryung. Haryung told Tisik about the arrival of the protagonist, and this completely changed Tisik's attitude, and he even began to laugh slightly. Soon, someone knocked on the door, and Haryung opened it, finding a miner. He ordered both of them to go underground. Quickly, she approached Tisik to warn him that Yang knew his location, so they needed to flee as soon as possible. The two traveled to the underground game room, and the guide mentioned that only Haryung could enter while Tisik had to stay outside with the workers. The guard intimidated Haryung to enter alone. She was about to do it, but Tisik held her hand tightly to prevent her. One of the workers took out a bag and approached Tisik, offering him a mysterious powder that served as medicine for his unknown disease. Sad, Haryung entered the room and looked at the villager, who approached her, caressing her face. He mentioned that he could help her escape with her father, but in return, she had to do a favor for him. He explained that she had to go to Yang's room at night. Back with the protagonist, Yultak scolded him because he thought he was going to have relations in front of everyone and outdoors. Yang examined the woman's leg legs, and flower petals brushed by him, so he caught one with his fingers. Yang quickly stood up and asked them to return because these flowers were poppies. They might appear beautiful, but they hid something because the woman's legs had marks. The petals of these poppies began to be scattered by the strong winds, completely invading the village. They surrounded the protagonist and Yultak. This made Yang suspicious of what was really happening in that village. We see the villager outside, complaining that his boss asked for more money than the last time now that Yang is present at the peak. He stopped near a bridge and waited there, looking around. When he saw that no one was following, he decided to jump into the water. Once reunited with the appointed leader, Young would be instructed by the latter about her duties and the consequences of her orders. The latter was to visit the small leader, who already had an unattractive history with women. Upon learning this, Young would try to resist, curiously asking about the consequences of refusing the leader's orders. In response, that strange, repugnant-looking individual would manipulate the young girl, reminding her that he could kill her and her father if she refused any order. Whether due to pressure or the resulting act, the girl would begin to cry uncontrollably, thus resigning herself to follow the village leader's orders, assuming an apparently dark fate. After the girl left the place, the village leader revealed that his intentions were to make Young the concubine of the small leader, thus bringing some money to the place. Later that day, in the evening hours, the small leader would be transferred to his room, left briefly in solitude while he pondered his thoughts. Among them was his thoughts about the village, a place that could provide what the small leader needed but was economically unable to sustain itself, being a place with nothing to plunder. Among the young man's assumptions, the place might be illegally producing drugs, an act that would be unforgivable, especially towards the village leader. Shortly after thinking and lying down on his bed, a female voice would politely call out to his door, asking if she was allowed to enter his room, which the young leader would affirm, letting her in. Upon seeing the girl, the young leader would notice a strong resemblance between her and his sister when she was still young. However, to his surprise, the girl would approach with somewhat suggestive intentions, which he assumed was the work of the village chief. Subsequently, the girl would attempt to undress, but she was interrupted and pushed to the floor as the lights were turned off, in an attempt by Jang to mimic the person who previously occupied that body. However, that wasn't his true self, so he quickly desisted and began talking to the girl about her nervousness, asking her to do her job if she already knew him. The girl, blushing and nervous, would reveal that it was her first time, which would elicit empathy from the young leader, who found a way to avoid the girl while maintaining his personality. However, driven by the threat, the girl would try to cling to the individual, who repeatedly asked her to leave while she demanded an explanation for making her go through such embarrassment. During the struggle, Young would make the young leader lose his balance, causing both of them to fall toward the girl's body, resulting in the young leader falling on her in a tempting position. The girl would ask the boy to take her, which seemed like something he would do. However, as he approached, he lifted the girl and applied a technique with one of his hands that made the girl faint. Upon waking up, the girl would notice that she was without clothes, covered only by the bed sheets where the young leader had temporarily slept. He was sitting in front of her with his back turned. In the girl's thoughts, she believed he had taken her virginity, but this was actually a setup by Yang. Later, the girl began to cry, asking for the small leader's help to save her father. Surprised but compelled to maintain his facade, Yang appeared indifferent to the girl's statements, who could still be seen with tears in her eyes. However, Yang found a way to keep up his facade and listen to the girl, acting in a condescending manner while allowing her to express herself. After listening to the girl's explanation, Yang agreed to help her, asking for her father's name, only to be surprised that it was Tisik. The young leader would let the girl rest in her room and then go out to look for Yultak. Upon arriving at the location, he would take a sample of the drug given to the girl's father, asking the young man to try the substance, which he would initially refuse. Due to this, the young leader would compel him to take it, witnessing its rapid and dangerous effects. He would subsequently make Yultak faint and eliminate all traces of the drug from his system using the ancient hero's artifact. With the use of the artifact, Yang was determined to make the village chief pay for his crimes. Later, we would witness a cave where Young's father, Tisik, was trapped and had been informed of his daughter's predicament. With his dwindling strength, the elderly man would attempt to confront his captors, to no avail, ending up injured on the floor. A mention would be made of the old man's past and how he used to have a good life, which one of the guards would interpret as mockery, as he accused the old man of being nothing more than an opportunist. In response, Tisik would once again attempt to attack, but it would be in vain, causing another wound to his head. He would be left in his cell, bleeding to death, which the guards would claim was an accident. Subsequently, we would be shown the other dungeons as the two guards progressed, mentioning that if it weren't for the drug, many of those people might have amounted to something. They would also express a desire for their work to be more appreciated. While they were in conversation, they would be interrupted by Yang, who, under his masked cloak, would easily defeat both guards by rendering them unconscious. He would then notice all the people in the place and affirm that he intended to return at some point to help them all. Shortly thereafter, Old Tisik would call out to the young man, attempting to get his attention, which he would achieve, causing the young leader to approach quickly. As he got closer, the elderly man would have a brief moment of lucidity in which he would ask the young man to cover up his death, something the young leader had no intention of doing as he wanted to save him. This wasn't just for the old man but also for his daughter's wish to see her father alive and safe again. However, it was nearly impossible to save his life due to the severity of the bleeding and wounds. Nevertheless, there was one last option to save his life, a risky one that could also cause irreversible damage or even death, but it was the only option. With a blood technique, Yang would take the subject's blood and merge it with his kai to restore his life energy. In the middle of the process, the young man almost failed to use his magic, and had he not stopped at just the right moment, the old man could have died, but that didn't happen. Subsequently, Old Tisik would appear with a strong, youthful body, grateful to the one who had saved his life and asking for his identity. After evading the question, Old Tisik would tell his story, how his greed for martial arts had taken away his dream life with his wife, who had died at the hands of assassins and kidnappers. After that moment, the martial arts master left the world of martial arts due to his remorse, and many people thought he had become weak in their absence. Then, the masked Yang would ask if he regretted being saved by him, to which Old Tisik would deny, saying he would never regret this second chance, and he pledged loyalty to this person. Before that, he would ask the young man to save his daughter, but the young man would say it wasn't necessary because the girl was already safe. Upon hearing this, the old man's gratitude would be even greater, and he would do nothing but repeatedly thank the young man for his kindness, vowing to follow him and his orders until the end of time. This marked the beginning of what appeared to be a beautiful friendship, which brought a smile to the masked one's face. Before he could leave, the old man would ask if he came from Somayang Palace due to his energy and the origin of the blood technique he had used, which could only be used by select warriors from that place. However, the old man wouldn't insist and would let the young man keep his secret, being informed that the village chief Changchun would come the next day to administer justice. Finally, the young man would ask for some time as he needed to do something, and he left the place. The next day, Changchun arrived at the place where the young leader was staying, due to his gratitude for the sample sent the previous day, which was nothing more than a deception to gather information. At that moment, it was revealed that the origin of the substance came from flowers called Manhwa that were found throughout the village, and these flowers contained a whitish substance inside them. When set on fire, it resulted in a kind of powder known as a potion, the same drug that caused the effect seen in Yultek the night before. Strategically, the young leader would praise Changchun, stating that it was a waste for someone so intelligent to squander their merchandise in such a small place, leading to an even bigger revelation. The village chief had addicted all the residents to the drug, deceiving and obliging them to produce the substance repeatedly with the aim of staying and living together. This revelation would anger and disgust the young leader. However, to continue his investigation, he would maintain his facade, stating that it was a product they could take to other places, ensuring that everyone could live happily, just like in that village. This would delight Changchun, who also received a proposal to go with the young leader to Samyeomgung, the place where all the heinous acts were being carried out. The village chief agreed, subsequently leading them to a rocky bridge that crossed a river. He would apologize for the inconvenience of the entrance and ask the young leader to accompany him along that route, also mentioning the audacity of the place where they had hidden the entrance. Upon reaching the location, some guards would be surprised by the presence of the young leader, especially because he was accompanying Changchun. After a reprimand from the chief to his subordinates for their poor attention to the young leader, he didn't show any problem, instead being condescending to Changchun. Before entering the place where the rest of the people were tasked with doing the heavy work, the young leader covered his face as per Changchun's recommendation. In that place, he explained that many of the individuals there were criminals who had been captured and forced to work on the supposed medicine as punishment. Some time passed between explanations and compliments when the young leader mentioned the girl who had visited his room the night before, referring to her father, who, according to his words, Changchun should know well as the chief of Barigal. Changchun mentioned that those who visit Barigal usually tend to perish, which the young master questioned, asking if there was anything that could be done to help. This cornered the village chief, who pretended to be more careful from now on to avoid being discovered. The young leader wondered why he was trying to hide everything, as he had allowed him to accompany him because he had complete trust in him. After following him for a while, they finally reached a room with a table in the center, and it had various men around it designated as the chief's escorts. In the place, the details about the addicted people and how they were formed would be revealed, part of a monopoly, as explained earlier. This would further enrage the young leader, who would try hard to keep his composure. After all, the young leader only had to wait for the person he had saved to arrive to put an end to all of this. As a signal, a powerful crash would alert those present that something was happening, revealing in an adjacent room one of the chief's men lying on the floor, looking with fear at an imposing figure approaching the place. To their surprise, everyone would now look at the renewed and robust old Tisik. Meanwhile, the rest of those present wondered how it was possible that the drug had stopped working, and how the old man had changed his appearance so drastically. In a mocking tone, the old man mentioned that if they had to worry about something, it was about the state they would be in the next few seconds. Saying this, the old man introduced himself by his nickname, the Asura Blood Demon, Old Tisik, the one who would inflict damage to their body, causing excruciating pain until eventually leading to their death. Subsequently, using a martial art apparently based on a tiger, Old Tisik would end the lives of two subordinates, treating them as if they were mere toys, and then turning around with a face possessed by rage. Then, that imposing figure would burst into the room where everyone was gathered, mentioning how a useless father had managed to survive for 10 years. He stated that he had wished for his death for a long time, only waiting in return for his daughter to remain safe, ensuring that nothing should happen to her. The present individuals asked if he had seen a famous doctor from the Eastern Han Dynasty, as it was impossible for him to look so unrecognizable from one day to the next. Additionally, the village chief mentioned that the daughter had already been offered to the young leader, who would quickly be recognized by Old Tisik for his feat the previous night. Due to this, with a somewhat comical and overacted performance, the young leader escaped the situation and left the place calmly, while the others faced the punisher of their sins. In the midst of insults and taunts, those present would prepare to attack the old man by order of the village chief, assuming that it would be an easy contest since he no longer possessed his internal energy. However, they would be surprised by the speed and ferocity of the martial master, who would dodge the spear of one of the subordinates and then end his life with a raised punch. This punch was a technique called the Blood Sky Asura Explosion, which disintegrated the target's body. This was how everyone realized they were mistaken, as Old Tisik was capable of using martial arts again. However, they would still stand firm and try to eliminate the threat together. Old Tisik would mention that he would put them in a blood prison, swiftly moving through the area while attacking those present, leaving a crimson trail wherever he went. Of those warriors, only parts of their bodies that had flown off their lifeless bodies remained. Finally, Old Tisik would encounter the leader of the sect that protected the village chief, who, in an attempt to get rid of that monster, would try to deceive him by using that substance. With enticing movements and placing it in his hand, the young man hoped that Old Tisik would be distracted so he could attack him by surprise with his sword, something that Old Tisik managed to avoid, remembering the harm the drug had caused. With the hand that had stopped the sword, he would torture the young man, crushing his hand, while with the other hand, he would deliver a punch directly to his face, ending the subordinate's life. Amidst the panic, the village chief would end up facing Old Tisik. Next, we would see Yang outside the place, wearing the hero's mask, explaining the use of the arts he had learned in that cave. Afterward, he would employ a technique named the Heavenly Demon's Fire Charge, with which he would traverse the entire area, burning every last plant used to make the drug. Amidst the fire, the young village leader would communicate with all the village inhabitants, questioning their actions while internal doubts arose about what was truly right and who the real heroes. In the midst of his doubts, Yang would contemplate ending them all as an act of salvation. Subsequently, everyone would begin to chant Black Sun in unison. As for the villagers, they would confuse the young leader with their sun god, who had sent his fire upon them in an act of salvation. This would awaken intrigue about the origins of the sun cult. Additionally, in the midst of the crowd emerging from the prisoner's cave, Old Tisik's presence would be noticed. This would remind him that there were still people here worth fighting for. If he couldn't eliminate the cult, he could change it and make this a better place. He would then leave without leaving any trace, receiving praise and celebration from the villagers. Some time later, in the palace of the small Mayan, a horde of visibly angry villagers would gather outside, claiming to see those who were inside. This would stress Yultak, who, accompanied by Ol Hariam, was concerned about the young leader's absence for some time. Subsequently, seemingly in response to that mention, the young leader would casually appear, sitting at one side of a table while the others looked surprised. He would reveal that he intended to leave, being stopped by a Yultak, who warned him that in doing so, he would be crushed by the angry mob. The young leader would disregard his followers' advice or warning, leaving anyway to face the crowd, who claimed they had been abandoned. Later, the young leader would return calmly, leaving the doors of the place open. Now, the place was calm and silent, for reasons that Yultak and Young still didn't understand. It didn't take long before a large figure with massive muscles entered the entrance, holding a blanket covering some object, with bloodstains around it. As expected, Young would approach the figure, intensifying his thought that it could be his father. However, after thinking for a moment, he assumed that his father couldn't have undergone such a radical change in such a short time. It was at that moment that the figure released what he had in his hand and approached the girl even more, asking her to lift her face, at which point the girl recognized her father's voice. At that moment, the girl's joy soared, embracing her father's figure as he promised not to let his daughter suffer or live in fear ever again. A Yultak would ask if it was a family reunion, to which the young leader would respond to keep silent in a moment like this. Subsequently, everyone present in that place would move to Tong's house, crossing through a heavy rain that they could hardly avoid. Upon arriving at that place, the old man would receive them, asking since when this place had become accessible freely, receiving a look from the young leader that would calm his attitude. Following this, introductions would be made, starting with Eagle, who would apologize for not being able to present himself properly due to the state of his legs. Subsequently, Young would introduce herself, followed by her father, who, in doubt, would ask why Eagle had told the young leader to look for him in the first place and how he had come to that conclusion. Eagle would respond by saying that he had been observing him for a long time, even since his stay in the Tears Brook village. This response would infuriate the martial master a bit, who would reprimand Eagle about who he was in his activities. Eagle would reply that his information was outdated from 10 years ago, and that he would take the time to study him later, something old Tisik would allow if that old cripple lived long enough. In the presence of this, the young leader would separate, saying that this kind of behavior was not allowed in the place, which would work as it would cause both of them to apologize. Subsequently, the young leader would give a speech intended to boost the spirits of everyone present, welcoming them as his family from now on inside his palace of the Lesser Sun. Tisik and Young would respond affirmatively, with the daughter responding with some hesitation in her words, due to her common nervousness. As for Yultak, his behavior would be quite informal, making some bizarre jokes that would amuse Tong. The old sage, Tong, would advise the young leader, saying that it was not the time to wait for the recruitment of all those who did not yet belong to any palace. This was because the great celestial festival would take place in the coming months, so before its arrival, they would have to do one of the two things mentioned below: increase their influence or decrease that of others. After some time, outside the palace of the Lesser Sun, the Forbidden Squad of the Merchant Palace and the Ghost Squad of the Pleasure Palace would unexpectedly encounter each other, both curious about the intentions of the other squad. The young leader of the Pleasure Palace, Jaihami, would address the one they called Sapo, the one who had caused trouble with the young leader some time ago, reminding him of that specific event. Chin, or the Toad, would respond angrily, telling her to shut her mouth, warning that it was better for them to leave now while he was being friendly, perhaps with a possible future invitation for a drink. In the midst of their trivial dispute, Yultak would come out accompanied by Eagle, the latter catching the attention of both young leaders, as it was the first time they had seen this individual. Further back, the young leader would make an appearance, asking about the visitors' intentions and those of their respective palaces. The Yultak, for his part, would demand that everyone show their respects to the young leader, which they did without any objection. Jaihami, on the other hand, would behave flirtatiously with the young leader repeatedly, something noticed by both Chin and Yultak, with the latter questioning her behavior. Chin would share his opinion with Yultak, who would hush him, causing a small comical argument. Seeing them, Yang would remember his past life, thinking about whether some of his loved ones who might see themselves reflected in those visitors and Yultak were doing well. Subsequently, he would order Yultak and Tisik to let them in. Apparently, they had received a letter from the young leader, as mentioned by Jaihami, who would be the first to enter the meeting room. In the room, the young leader would be accompanied by Tisik, who would remain on the side. As on the previous occasion, Jaihami would repeatedly display a seductive attitude, insinuating her body and her girls to the young leader, having to be stopped by Tisik. Later, the girl would be explained that he was more than just a servant or escort. The girl would say that in that case, she could have sent her palace girls. Later, the young leader would telepathically tell Tisik to let her pass, at which point the girl would approach close enough to touch the young leader's cheek with her hand. Upon doing this, the young leader would react quickly, taking her hand and asking how long he should wait for Jae-hami. She would respond that they should go to the pleasure palace and resolve things. Finally, she would ask what she could do for him, at which point Yang would surprisingly respond by asking if he should kill her or not. With this, the girl would return to her previous position, mentioning that the young leader should go to the pleasure palace to live a life befitting his status, ending with a manic and frivolous laugh. This would infuriate old Tisik, who would ask if he could kill her telepathic, but that would not be allowed, although he could give her a lesson in manners. With this in mind, old Tisik would respond that she was the representative of the pleasure palace, but seemed to be someone who wanted to sell her body. The girl would ask how to take that lack of respect, to which old Tisik would say it was not that, but rather her lack of class and respect for the principles of their cult. She had touched the young leader's face without his permission, compromised his safety by getting too close without real verbal consent, so if she were executed, it would be entirely justified. This would further infuriate her, leading her to draw her two swords and prepare to attack old Tisik, who would wait patiently for the young leader's instructions in order to proceed correct. The latter would mention how low the demonic cult was, from its teachings to its education and security, ending with a telepathic message to old Tisik not to kill her. Before she could even touch him, old Tisik would begin to release his energy, which was so imposing that Jae-hami could feel it, surprising and frightening. Later, the scene would show the exterior of the room, with sounds of impacts and other noises indicating a difficult situation for the young leader coming from inside. Faced with this, Yultak would attempt to enter the room, but the entrance would be blocked by the companions from the pleasure palace, who positioned themselves side by side. As for the merchant palace, they would not intervene in any way, as the death of the young leader would be beneficial to them as well. With no other option, Yultak would be forced to threaten the pleasure palace girls with his sword because he would not allow his leader to be killed. It was then that a voice from inside said there was no need to make a scene since nothing had happened after all. Now, we would see the interior, where a defeated and injured Jae-hami lay on the floor while being observed by the young leader and old Tisik, who showed no signs of injury. Briefly, Yang would explain what happened, mentioning that old Tisik had used a demonic art that gave you great physical strength and enhanced your abilities, a technique that would be a mistake if used against someone more powerful, as it wore you out over time and prevented you from using your strength to the fullest. The young leader would allude to the pleasure palace being of little value since they could barely send a girl who was unable to properly use her sword to kill him, throwing her body to the ground. In addition to this, he would ask if just because she was seeking his head, he should hang her head in the pleasure palace, or perhaps give her an appropriate punishment right there and then. The girl would call him crazy, to which he would respond that it wasn't worth being with a girl like her, ending with a message for the master of the pleasure palace. He turned his head halfway, glanced at the girl, and belittled her, saying, "Come in person next time." The girl would respond that the boy would regret treating her like this, to which the young leader would ask what a girl with her skills could do against him. This would only cause tears of helplessness in the girl, who would receive the order to leave shortly after, exiting the room defeated. After her departure, old Tisik would take the opportunity to ask the young leader about his true self since he had shown two completely opposite personalities during the time they had known each other. The young leader would respond somewhat rudely, which old Tisik deduced was an offense on his part that had angered the young leader, so he quickly apologized. The young leader would only say that it shouldn't happen again, which he understood. Afterward, old Tisik would mention that the leader of the pleasure palace was ruthless, so it would be best to kill the young leader before the problem got out of hand. The young leader would say he had already considered that, and it would be best not to make any moves since the members of the pleasure palace family were valued by their leader. He would also make old Tisik swear never to kill anyone unless ordered by the young leader. Later, the scene would show the defeated leader of the pleasure palace being consoled by her companions, causing doubts among everyone about what had happened, assuming they had been intimate. The young leader would also leave, asking Chen to go to the merchant palace. Subsequently, the scene would show Danyewa, who was in the sword pillar palace as usual. In the place, the girl would once again complain to her nanny about her fiancé, the young leader, whom she found repulsive and would prefer to marry anyone else rather than such a despicable person. Hearing this, the nanny would tell her to lower her voice because the master of their palace could hear, but she claimed not to care, and shouted her arguments even louder. Unfortunately for her, the master of their tower was entering the room where she was. Shortly afterward, we would see Danyewa in a combat area facing the leader of the palace, both wielding a sword toward each other. The leader would tell her to pick up the sword, which the the girl did with conviction while repeatedly arguing that she wouldn't marry the boy. The master of the place would ask her if she would let an emotional moment ruin the potential biggest event of her life, which the girl denied because it wasn't emotions. She just didn't want to marry a weakling like him. The master also reminded her that the girl had sworn her commitment to the young leader in front of the sacred flames. The girl responded that she was also allowed to refuse if she didn't want to. After this, the master challenged her to cut through him, which the girl apparently did, as she would suddenly find herself behind the master, ending with a scream repeating her previous arguments. Later, she would drop her sword and run out of the place while the master maintained a surprised look. The master would mention that she had been training a lot, contemplating the possibility that the girl might be reaching the supreme pinnacle level. Next, the master would call his squad leader, asking him to bring the young leader to the place, a task that the squad leader would accept. The purpose of this was to reassure his daughter that the young leader had a suitable martial level for her as a gift. Now we would see the young leader traveling alongside the representative of the merchant palace, both heading to Mount Gu. The young leader would request to rest when they were close to the location, to which Chen would say it wasn't necessary, but they ended up resting anyway. Later, the young leader would call Chen by his name, which surprised him because the young leader wasn't in the habit of remembering such things, even though he had tried to kill him. The young leader would ask if Chen was the successor of the merchant palace, which he denied. The young leader thought of taking advantage of the situation, starting with an insinuation about killing him, which surprised Chen due to its suddenness. With a look full of madness, the young leader would ask Yultak to hold him, attempting to pull a knife from Chen's robe. Noticing how everyone present ignored the young leader's command, this confirmed his suspicions about the real leader of the place, seeing how someone else was being protected among the crowd. In addition to this, old Tisik would notice his presence, so he was telepathically stopped by the young leader. Then that figure would reveal his face, asking the young leader to stop his actions. The person would introduce himself as the true leader of the squad, Chun Burang. He would justify his lie by claiming that he did it to protect the young leader. Deceiving his men was the perfect way to deceive the young leader as well. The young leader would realize that he wasn't a novice like those who had attended his palace before. Finally, he would tell him not to deceive him again, or there would be consequences, which Burang hinted at igniting. The young leader would question him once more, which the squad leader didn't hear. Nevertheless, the young leader decided to take his word. After a while, they would finally arrive at the outskirts of the merchant palace, noting how a vast river called the Hot Sea extended below. It got its name because in the past, it was often confused with the sea, just as it had happened to the young leader. Furthermore, there is a nation known as Warats there. Old Tisik would mention some facts about the place to his daughter, which would surprise her, asking if he had ever been there, admitted by a brief silence. Burang would ask his name, to which he would respond with Blood Asura, his nickname. Once in the village, most of the inhabitants could be seen going about their usual activities, portraying a seemingly cheerful and picturesque place, dominated by commerce as expected. Upon entering the palace, Yultak would begin to stutter the name of Hyungdae, catching the young leader's attention. This happened at the same time as an individual with white hair and dark skin came out to greet them. Now we would see that person, Yujin, the son of the merchant palace master, engaging in a conversation with Chen's father, who had not yet fulfilled his promise to him. The old man would mention that the nation of Warats was being plagued by a sandstorm, so he couldn't proceed under those circumstances. Changing the subject, Yujin would mention the altercation between the young leader and Chen, so he intended to speak directly with the son of that old man to resolve things properly. The old man would say it wasn't necessary, but if he truly wished for it, he would arrange to call his son. Yujin would mention that he was not at the castle. Furthermore, his knowledge of the young leader's stay at the Temple of the Sun meant that another altercation with the young leader could occur. The old man would say this wouldn't happen, which didn't matter to the boy anyway, who set off to find the young leader. Chen's father would attempt to stop him again, but he was surprised by blasts fired by Yujin, which were directed directly at one of the plant's leaves. Yujin would affirm that if the weed was detected in time, the plant would live, otherwise, it had to be cut from the root. After that, he left to solve the problem of Warats, while that gentleman insulted him in his thoughts. Before leaving, the leader of Martial Squad 7, THWA, prepared him while asking about Yujin's true intentions, to which he responded by telling her to stop asking unnecessary questions. Before departing, a bird that apparently was under his guardianship informed informed him that an acquaintance had arrived at this place, subsequently hearing the call to the name Hyun. After that, the boy went directly to the young leader, where the latter inquired about his intentions for being in this palace as a representative of the Blood Palace, ignoring the person who was calling Yultak, his brother. Yujin would respond that he had no reason not to be in this place, which he would return by asking the same question to the young leader, who would give the exact same response as Yujin. Yultak would try to talk to his brother, however, he would just taunt him, calling him pathetic, as he usually did. Yujin would ask to see Chin before leaving, with the latter wondering if he was there for him, as he had brought his personal squad, Martial Squad 7, with him. Subsequently, we would see the travelers in a hall where they would talk more about Yujin and his palace, which was ranked 15th for the throne and had the most martial power. During the conversation, Yultak appeared agitated because talking about his family was tough due to the bad relationship he had with his father for being his concubine's son. However, his brother had no problem with that. He only minded that he wasted time with the little leader in brothels. He also mentioned that the Blood Palace had a good position with the Merchant Palace, especially in establishing escorts for the latter. The little leader would ask them to immediately gather information about them and their intentions regarding the little leader's bank, with the Yultak being dragged away by the old. At this point, the young leader would contemplate the almost non-existent possibility of forming an alliance with Cheonso, as well as detailing the connections between the Merchant Palace and the Pleasure Palace with establishments and services. During his thoughts, Buring would enter the room, this time with a different expression than before. This would be used against him because the young leader threatened to leave due to his insolence. Upon hearing this, the squad leader would do everything he could to keep him in place, swearing to do everything the young leader ordered. Upon hearing this, the little leader managed to manipulate him into making a written oath, which he would not refuse to do. When he started to write, he would ask what the assigned task was, thinking that he only had to protect the little leader. That's when the young leader would reveal his true intention. He intended for the squad leader, Buring, to annihilate the entire palace of the Lesser Sun. Upon receiving this request, Buring would say he was only trying to save him because there were many people who wanted to take his life, so everything he had done was for the young leader's good. However, the young leader couldn't believe those words because during the entire journey and his stay, he had been repeatedly deceived, questioning whether he could really trust the people in that place. Buring initially refused to continue writing, so the young leader decided to leave the place as a manipulative move, which turned out to be useful and accurate, as it caused Buring to agree to his requests. In addition to noting what was mentioned before, it would be mentioned that in case Buring broke his word, he would be considered a traitor. Subsequently, the young leader would hand over the Sun Plaque, a plate used to identify members of the demon cult. The reasons why Buring did this so easily could be because he considered the Palace of the Sun as just a game where he was sure of his word. Regardless of the reason, he must now protect the Palace of the Sun at all costs. After this, the young leader would be taken to Cheonso, who would receive him in a cordial and polite manner. He would later say that he had wanted to send a gift to him for a long time, specifically since his arrival, so he began to offer some gifts after a comment from the young leader. However, the conversation would take a different tone when the young leader started to talk about the actions committed by Cheonso's son, implying that perhaps he had overlooked his sons and his own mistake. After having irritated the young leader, he had ordered his servants to lock him in a room, all while speaking from a higher chair while the young leader was on the ground. This would end with a final insinuation, one in which he would ask if he was not afraid of being accused of treason, one that was not meant to be hidden, entirely shameless. Cheonso would burst into laughter, praising how mature the young leader had become, and assuring that the cult's future was in very good hands. Subsequently, Cheonso would give his place to his guest, to which the latter would simply respond by saying it's only fair. As they proceeded to the site, he would pass one of the books that belonged to the master of this palace, which would cause a displeasure not expressed through words. In the past, Yang had dealt with people like Cheonso, arguing that the only way to lead these people down the desired path is to scratch them where they need to be scratched. Later, the young leader would talk about the current state of the throne, mentioning that since his father's sudden disappearance, nothing had been the same. In addition, he would say he had no interest in the affairs of other palaces, nor did he have the slightest interest in who held the position of sect leader. He would finish by asking if he understood where he was going. Cheonso would laugh again and apologize for the uncivilized treatment given to the young leader, the reason being Cheonso's preoccupation with other matters. As a symbol of his apology, the palace master would mention that he had been saving a gift, a special and expensive one that he was sure the young leader would like. After calling Buring, He would bring a wooden box that housed what appeared to be 2 simple daggers. However, Cheonso Ma would reveal that it was one of the 5 sacred weapons, which left the young leader shocked for a few moments. In addition to this gift, Cheonso Ma promised to send tons of gold ingots every month to the Lesser Sun Palace, all as a form of apology as mentioned earlier. He would also build a much larger palace for him. However, all of this had one condition. Eventually, the young leader had to become the leader of the cult, so Cheonso Ma proposed an alliance between the Lesser Sun Palace and the Merchant Palace, promising to support him. The little leader would briefly look at him with a mischievous look, making sure with a question. Are you asking me to become the leader of the cult? And that's how the first part of this manhwa ends. If you have reached this part of the video, let me tell you that you have been one of the few people to make it here. So comment the word ability in the comments. Remember to subscribe to not miss any videos. With that said, see you in the next video.